Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your busy days to join us for this third iteration of our sharing of learnings from Europe during our circular economy study tour last year. Gosh, the time has flown. We'll just give it a couple of minutes for everyone to start filtering into the room, and we'll get stuck into a really insightful and I think really valid and timely conversation around how do we engage with local governments, the experience of local government from European examples to the adoption of circular economy business models into local governments in Australia. So hopefully this will be a useful example of what we've learned. I'm sure it will be. We've got some great speakers today, and we're looking forward to sharing those elements of knowledge with you. So we'll just give it another minute or so for people to come in. Looking forward to having a discussion. Hopefully everyone's days are progressing. It's the weeks are coming up to a short week next week, so that'll be nice. And yeah, looking forward to having a chance to revisit all of the great research and activities that are taking place in the circular economy space in Australia. Okay, I might get started then as people start to continue to filter in. So hello and welcome to everyone to joining this third iteration, focusing on our circular economy learnings from Europe in our 2023 European study tour. So thank you again for choosing to spend your hour, lunchtime hour perhaps, with us here this Wednesday. My name is Dr. Nicole Garofano. I'm the Head of Circular Economy Development for Planet Ark, and I also lead the Australian Circular Economy Hub, or the ACE Hub as we call it. The ACE Hub proudly acknowledges our program establishment partner, the Australian Government, and also our founding partners, KPMG and Alexis Energy, and our official sponsor, Bingo Industries. And really our mission is to facilitate this transition to a circular economy in Australia by providing the national reference platform for circular economy knowledge and collaboration. So this is an example today of the many activities that we offer through the ACE Hub, and I encourage you to visit our website if not already. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are calling in from today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I have the privilege of joining from the lands of the Jagera and Turrbal peoples from Meanjin. Today we are excited to present this third installation of our ACE Hub webinar learning series from Europe. The title today is Reflections of European Local Government Authorities. And today we will be joined by two of our respected local government focused delegates, Roelof and Eloise, and I'll introduce you to them shortly. Both joined our delegation last year, and so we're excited to hear some reflections from them. Before we go on, in terms of housekeeping, just remember to select your gallery view in the top corner of your screen so you can see our speakers, particularly when we get to the Q&A session. The event will be recorded, is being recorded, and we'll be sharing that link onto our YouTube channel in the coming week with any follow-up information. And we look forward to sharing those additional resources with you in due course. If you do have any questions, we invite you to submit them using the Q&A function for this webinar. And again, those questions will also be recorded. We'll try and get to the questions as much as we can, but if they're not all answered, we will attempt to come back to you with some of the responses with our email in the following week. So hopefully that will help provide some responses for you. So we've got a lot to cover in the next 60 minutes, and so we'll get cracking and start with just a little bit of context setting on what we are talking about here today, where this information has been generated from. If you were with us in our first and second webinars, you'll be familiar with our areas of focus. So during this study tour that we arranged, that the ACE Hub arranged in May 2023, we were able to focus on attending the World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki in Finland. But we were also able to include a week's focus in the Netherlands with our delegates, and also Paul, our Chief Sustainability Advisor and co-founder of Planet Ark, Paul Clemenco, and myself also attended some meetings in Sweden, France, and the UK. So it was a busy time, and we learned a lot. And so the intention is to really share much of this learnings with as many people as we can. We also received incredible support to organise this tour in collaboration with a number of partners, including the diplomatic missions of the Netherlands in Australia, Business Finland in Australia, the Swedish Embassy and the Swedish Australian Chamber of Commerce, and our own Austrade, both here and in Europe, and DFAT, and as well as many contributors to the many meetings that we had to enable such a rich exchange of knowledge over the time. So thank you again to all of you for your assistance. But it is the delegates that we're focused on with this series. And as shown on this slide, we had 11 of us in total. Each of these individuals chose to invest their own time, their resources to attend and participate in either all or some of the journey. And today we'll hear from Roelof and Eloise. Roelof was able to join us for the Netherlands and the World Circular Economy Forum, and Eloise for the WCEF in Finland. But as a reminder as well, we have some objectives of the study tour, and these were these. And again, it's basically to reiterate that the main intention is to gather up our knowledge and to share it with as many folk as we can, which of course this webinar supports. The study tour really showed that we in this part of the world can really learn quite a bit from our European friends. And we know that we've got a transition already underway here in Australia, but we have some opportunities to leapfrog that we can learn from our friends over there. So now to our speakers. As mentioned in this webinar, we are joined by Roelof Vogel, Circular Economy Researcher at Monash Business School, and Eloise Lobsey, who's the Program Lead for the Circular Economy at the Hunter Joint Organisation. I invite you to connect with Roelof and Eloise on LinkedIn if you're not already. This is where you can find their full list of experience and bios. But as a quick summary, Roelof is a circular economy researcher at Monash. Following a career in the global packaging industry, Roelof has focused his time now on circular economy research. He's currently registered as a PhD at Monash in the business school, and his interest is the adoption of circular economy by small and medium enterprises and the influence of local government on that adoption. In early 2023, he undertook 3 months of fieldwork in the Netherlands, and certainly our study tour was a part of his research. So thanks for joining us today, Roelof. I look forward to hearing from you. And Eloise is the program lead for the circular economy at the Hunter Joint Organisation. Eloise is passionate about circular design thinking, waste avoidance, local food systems, and enjoys designing and delivering strategic and impactful environmental programs. Eloise has had 16 years of experience in local government, both here in New South Wales, Victoria, and in the UK. Eloise's experience has included environmental policy, food systems, resource recovery, behaviour change programs, placemaking, and land use planning. Such a diverse range of experience, Eloise, that we can draw on with your presentation today. So welcome to you both. We are excited to have you here and to hear how the experience of joining us on the study tour has influenced certainly the work, what you've learned, and the work that you're doing here back in Australia. So with that, I'll pass over to you, Roelof, to kick off our presentations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nicole, and hello, everybody. Next slide, please. So I want to provide a bit of additional context to my talk today. You heard from Nicole, the topic in my research is more fully the diffusion and adoption of circular economy innovation by SMEs, which are small and medium enterprises, and the agency of local government. And just to unpack that a little bit, diffusion here means just the process through which innovation spreads, and in this case, circular economy innovation. And adoption is the decision and subsequent implementation of that innovation by actors in a social system, and an agency is the active behavior. So where actors can be individuals or groups of individuals, departments in organizations or whole organizations. So that really explains the lens through which I was looking at my entire trip. You know, not only the incredible tour, the study tour that Nicole put together, I reflect here that we had 23 different presenters and we had multiple site visits, but then independently of that, I had 36 interviews. You see here that the local governments that I interviewed and studied in the Netherlands are Amsterdam and Haarlem, which are in the province of North Holland, and Leiden, which is in the province of South Holland. I had the chance to interview 4 people in 2 European community departments in Brussels. And aside from that, at a federal and provincial level in the Netherlands. Just want to spend a moment to explain that last term there, Metropolitan Region of Amsterdam, or the MRA as it's known. That's made up of 30 local governments and 2 provinces, the province of North Holland and Flevoland. And as I'll reflect later, they're an important construct and provide an additional level of government given the activity levels that they have in terms of circular economy as well. Next slide, please. So the way I've structured the talk today is 4 areas of reflection and insights, and you see them on the screen here. And the reason for the insights and providing them is they give a bit of an aha moment. They help us sort of see beyond just the facts that we're looking at and hopefully bring a new way of thinking, a new avenue of thinking about a particular phenomenon. New slide, please. Next slide. So just starting with the integrated approach and tiers of government. If you look at the top green row in this matrix, I reflect on the differences in legislative roles, proximity to citizens and business, and policy implementation. And importantly, from an LGA perspective in that bottom row, there's really limited influence on legislation, but a much higher proximity to citizens and small business when compared to other levels of government. And obviously policy implementation is at a small and local scale, and sort of with this framework that helped me think about the research that I was doing. Next slide, please. And just building on this integrated approach and tiers of government, whereas here in Australia, I'm really looking at 3 levels of government. In the Netherlands, I found I needed to consider 5. The reason for that, of course, is you have to think about what the EU is doing, and also the introduction of the MRA, and Amsterdam is an important part of the MRA. And just to explain the role of the EU, they're obviously responsible for strategy and policy documents, but they also legislate directives and regulations. So EU directives are legislative acts that set out goals that EU members must achieve through their own legislation, whereas regulation is legislation that is binding across all EU members. Moving then to that second point, the EU and NL national leadership, and I reflect here on the fact that what we saw in the Netherlands was really a top-down approach to introducing circular economy. So the first strategy and planning out of the EU was in 2015 and followed in 2016 by the Netherlands. And the EU had its first directives, which had legislated in 2018, and that was around extended producer responsibility. There was some on waste management and landfill. So that third point in terms of reflection is the independent assessment of Netherlands' progress. And what the government has done, they've put in place an organization called the PBL, but translated as the Environmental Assessment Agency, which is different from an EPA, which is EPAs tend to be more policing functions. The Environmental Assessment Agency is more about auditing. And what they need to do in the Netherlands is audit the CE progress every 2 years. So the first report was in 21, and the second of the reports was last year in 23. So what are the insights that come out of this? I actually found that even with the very top-down and well-integrated approach, whereas the advanced examples of CE adoption are well ahead, there are lots of smaller LGAs that just haven't been able to pick up on that at all. And it's because they either don't have an appetite and or the resources because of their size, or a combination of both of those. And that's sort of reflected in Victoria as well. I've looked at the documentation of all 79 local governments in the state of Victoria, and I find that 31 of those 79 have got absolutely no mention of circular economy. Now, there's no legislative requirement in Victoria to cover circular economy, but I find at the other end that there are many that are now introducing a separate circular economy policy, which is part of their sustainability practice. And at the top end, you've got a city like Glen Ira, where if you go to the publicly available documents, they mention circular economy 285 times. So with that sort of as a proxy of where the state of development is, you can see it's also pretty widespread here in Australia. Next slide, please. I'll move to the second area of reflection and insights, namely leadership, change agency, and circular economy innovation. And some of my reflections here are around the first one you can see is committed vision, strategy, and implementation plans. If I look at Amsterdam, they started in 2019 and had a pretty wide scope period of research, just to see what they should be tackling and putting together a strategy. They had wide consultation and collect a lot of data. They also had Kate Raworth, who wrote Donut Economics, as a consultant who was introduced at that time. And if you look at their documentation now, you'll see that right at the top end, an overarching document is called Amsterdam, the City Donut. And that sort of gives the vision, of where they want to go. And the City Donut and that whole strategy very much reflects Kate Raworth's thinking. So you're not only talking there about where we are in terms of boundaries, global boundaries, but it's also about individual societal welfare, that's built into that. And cascading down from it, you've got the Amsterdam Circular Strategy, which is from 2020 to 2025. And then the next tier down, they had an innovation and implementation program, which was just for a 2-year period. And they then paused and assessed where they'd got to, and built on their reflections. They've now got their current implementation strategy document, which is dated 23-26. So you can see that there's massive amount of weight, I should say, behind this vision, strategy, and implementation planning in advanced examples like Amsterdam. Then move on quickly to governance structure and portfolios. There I found, sorry, no slide change yet. In terms of governance structure and portfolios, what I found there is that the way that councillors are elected are quite different from what we see here. They use a system of proportional representation, and that arising out of that, the parties that are represented will form a coalition of the councillors, and from that coalition of councillors, they'll negotiate who takes particular portfolios. So what invariably happens is that members of what is called the Green Left Party, GroenLinks, take on a portfolio to do with sustainability and circular economy. So certainly there's some real differences when I look at elected councillors and how they interact with the bureaucrats, the officers within the LGAs. Lastly here, I want to focus on learn by doing. I've come across this quite a lot in interviews and documentation, and it certainly reflects how they think, that it's still pretty much experimental and the early stages of introducing circular economy. Next one, please. Next slide. So some insights here. Good governance is definitely needed. And what I've seen is that it's very difficult for single change agents working in their own organization in a single department to achieve outcomes that go beyond the immediate short impact they might have. So very important to get that right. I'll just jump to the last one as well. CE officer capacity and equivalence, I say here. I see absolutely no difference in the intellectual capacity, or the basic knowledge of officers that I met in Netherlands or in Europe to what we have here. It's much more the difference in building expertise, experimenting, and being better supported. Next slide, please. Come on to the third area of reflection, which is circular economy and socioeconomic transition. I saw a lot of evidence of thoughts and reflections on the polycrisis response, and how climate change impact is really by far the most important of these, and the careful positioning of circular economy as being one platform, one pillar of delivering sustainable outcomes. and insights that then arise from that. A recognition that there's a socio-economic transition that needs to be undertaken, within the LGA and in the broader environment, and a careful positioning of what role circular economy has in that. And we see elements of that certainly in Australia as well, with the most advanced in terms of their thinking here too, but very evident in the LGAs that I interviewed there. The second insight, the Environmental Assessment Agency in the Netherlands, in its 2023 assessment, has recommended a shift in the balance of coercion versus encouragement to accelerate circular economy adoption in the Netherlands. Now, that's really interesting because they're quite far advanced as they are anyway, but they're saying to the government and cascading down obviously to a provincial and local government level as well, you really need to use more coercion and find the policy instruments to support that, because otherwise you're never going to meet your goals. Lastly, my insight here around systems thinking and socioeconomic actors. I think systems thinking really makes one focus on the actors in a system and the stakeholders and how they're influenced and how they seek to exert influence. And the way this is interpreted, in the documents that I've seen, discussions I've had, it brings a recognition that there needs to be a strong focus on the obstacles in the way of introducing circular economy and the time and the resources that are going to be needed to overcome them. And I know that Debbie O'Byrne, in one of her previous presentations, also is very strong on the systems thinking approach, and at the time, I think, recommended that people have a good look at it. I'm very briefly going to look at the next slide with you. And there's a lot in this, but I'm just going to unpack the major elements. So you'll find this in the most recent of the Amsterdam city documents on implementation, and it's called the X-Curve. It's been created by an institute called DRIFT, Dutch Research Institute for Transitions, which is based at Erasmus University in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And a quick explanation here, think of the vertical axis, the y-axis, as being the percentage of adoption of an innovation, in this case, a circular economy innovation or a change you want to make in a particular market sector. The x-axis, or the horizontal axis, is time. So if we have a look and go bottom left and look at new regime, as we move left to right up that curve, what it's signifying is a greater percentage uptake of the change. The real value of this and the way that it helps the LGAs in the Netherlands think about it is the top curve, which goes top right to bottom, top left to bottom right. And that's the old regime, the dominating forces of the old regime. And it really helps them think about what are the consequences of trying to introduce something new and what are the obstacles. I'll leave you to investigate that further, but I'll just close on this slide by quoting from the report. Transitions are lengthy and unpredictable processes. It is essential to speed up and provide directions in these processes, and Amsterdam is active in all phases of the X-curve from start to finish so that we can achieve our goals for 2030, 2040, and 2050. I'm on to my last slide now, and just want to talk about rational economic decision-making. And the first reflection here is that the E in CE is the economy we're in. And it's a reflection that the linear economy and the circular economy are sort of two utopian states at either end of a continuum. And what the Circular Economy Organization and the GAP report every year helps us focus on is that globally we're at just over 7%, and the CSRO report in Australia recently put us at 4% if we include also exports. And it just tells us we're on a continuum. So the real work is on how we move within the economy we're in. And that's why I reflect here on rational economic decision-making, because that's really what drives behaviors. And I move on then to this notion that LGAs need to prioritize based on impact from what I've seen and what I saw them doing. And thinking, yes, circular economy is about resource utilization and reducing the amount of extraction, but it's also very much about how do we support sustainable development and reduce, in the first instance, greenhouse gas emissions. So the quick insights here, The socioeconomic system that we're currently in is absolutely perfectly designed to deliver the unsustainable results we're getting. And I'll leave you to contemplate what that tells us about systems and the system we're in. And the second point, that businesses and consumers make rational economic decisions. So we see a lot of work being done for greater circular economy adoption, but a lot of it is still at the experimental and niche markets. And we've got to make the decisions more rational to move beyond that, to get into the mainstream and become predominant in particular markets. LGAs have got procurement power. It's really an underutilized area in terms of economic decision making, and LGAs can certainly do a lot of work there to make it rational for suppliers to supply goods that have got a much greater circular economy principle and are designed on a much greater circular economy principle basis. And then lastly, I believe that LGAs can be very influential actors in facilitating this intersection between resource flows and also business opportunities. Thank you very much. And I'm now going to hand over to Eloise. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Roelof. So many really valuable insights there, and it really aligns with what I took away from the trip. I'm coming at this conversation, I guess, from a bit of a practitioner's perspective. So I wanted to quickly give an intro and to the context that I work within so that my learnings and how we're integrating them make a bit more sense. So I work for the Hunter JO. It's a regional collaboration body under the Local Government Act here in New South Wales. And we exist to serve our 10 member councils. Plus we also have the Central Coast Council as an associate member. Next slide. We're a high growth region in economic transition. So we need to replace the $23.6 billion worth of gross regional product that is coal in order to provide the jobs our community need into the future and to play our role, continue to play our role as a regional economic powerhouse. We have a lot of key assets that work in our favour. We've got a deep water port, energy infrastructure, legacy, and plenty of land availability, all which make us a pretty great test region for the circular economy. Next slide. There isn't really time to talk you through this slide, but I just wanted to say that there's about 6 years worth of work that we're sort of into our journey now with, and we have a clear mandate to be a leading circular region in Australia. And we're really starting to hone in on what our role is and what we need in order to perform that role for our region. Next slide. So I was really privileged to be able to join in for the Finnish components of the ACE Hub study tour. And as Nicole said, that involved the World Circular Economy Forum itself, plus a few accelerator events and some side meetings with the Finnish government and the European Commission. It was a big couple of days. There was a lot of information to digest. And I found that the forum itself was quite focused on the macro scale. So things like how multilateral banks were addressing circular economy, how nature positive needs to be at the heart of the green transition, what the role of mining is in a circular economy, some of these really big topics. And I think it was a great global pulse check for me. But for me, I was really keen to understand more about the how. So the gold was really in the side meetings and the trade floor expo sections of the forum. And this is where I could speak to fellow circular economy practitioners and ask them loads of questions. Things like how long had their organization been working in this space? How were they funded? How was their work structured? And being about 9 months on now, I think it's been a really good time to pause and reflect on that, because it's crystallized what did stick with me out of those conversations and what things I focused on trying to integrate into our work at the JO. So those two things for me was, the first one was being around the need for place-based circular economy hubs, listening to an accelerator session on hotspots and then talking to people working in circular economy hubs. It became pretty obvious to me that circular economy had well and truly transitioned out of waste departments and was sitting more in those innovation organizations or CE specific hubs. which aligns with the Roelof's research. The other key takeaway for me was the role of circular economy in the green transition. Whilst this idea wasn't new to me, listening to the speakers, the likes of Jeff McCarney of the Research Smart Property Group in Canada, it really drove home the urgency of bringing together these two movements to create sensible outcomes. From memory, I think the stat was something like if we recaptured all of the precious minerals and metals extracted to date, it would only meet 20% of the material needs of the green transition, which is a really alarming statistic and really highlights that urgency of rethinking material intensity of clean energy, and something that's been really salient to an energy region like ours. I'm going to focus this presentation more on the circular economy hubs learning because of the place-based focus of this session, but I did want to flag this other learning because it's really becoming a stronger advocacy focus for our work in the region. Next slide. So circular economy hubs, following the trip, I got really interested in understanding more about the roles of circular economy hubs and what learnings we could take from Europe for our own hub, Hunter Circular, which I'll talk about a bit more later. Next slide. One observation has been that circular economy hubs are really popping up all across the globe. As you can see, there's just a smattering of them. And they exist to do some of that difficult, messy system change work that Roelof was talking about, and to help increase the bandwidth of actors to enable them to work differently. So whether that be a government body or an individual business. They acknowledge that without this kind of enabling resourcing, the path of least resistance will most likely get defaulted to. So what we'd get at best is an advanced recycling economy. Hubs or hotspots, as they're often called, are operating at those various scales. So we've got international bodies like the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, down to city level like Circular Berlin, and actually right down to the micro level, you might have a community tool library, for example. Europe has been really driving this movement with their network of circular hotspots really at the center of this. Next slide. There are some strong commonalities between the hubs I looked into, and you can understand them as a physical and/or digital place that is an important center of activity where people work together in a common pursuit of a more circular economy, which is, I appreciate, a pretty broad definition. So I've found it pretty useful to focus in on the common functions and features of hubs. Hubs are typically hosted or auspiced by a trusted leader or backbone organization, and they support things like connection and connectivity amongst an ecosystem, the sharing of knowledge, encouraging open innovation, and supporting practical action. They tend to have government seed funding behind them. I'm pretty sure almost all the examples I looked at had government seed funding. And then they tend to move to more of a public-private partnership model. Their funding models also vary quite a bit. There's membership models, sponsorship models, or joint ventures. Next slide. What we found is that there's a clear role for circular economy hubs to exist operating on that regional meso level, which is the space that we operate in. This enables a place-based approach to be taken to the circular economy, so bringing together the top-down and bottom-up circular economy. And by regions, I mean subnational regions, not region states, which gets a bit confusing when you're in Europe. But as you can see on the diagram on the right, the role of the regional and city government is to help with the creation of preconditions for circular economy, which means when you're working at the meso level, this is supporting things like clusters and networks and eco-industrial parks and precincts. This correlates really nicely with what we've learned with our circularity journey so far. And it also aligns with a couple of pieces of work that we have currently underway, which I'll talk about in a minute. Next slide. Some examples of hubs I spoke to in Helsinki was the Helsinki-Uusimaa Circular Valley, which is a regional accelerator working with its ecosystem, circular economy ecosystem in the Helsinki region. And it's been funded as a pilot of the EU's Circular Cities and Regions Initiative via regional funding scheme. They have a dedicated team of 4 and a budget of around 720,000 euros, which is about 1.2 million AUD over 2 years. What stuck with me was the focus that they have developed around facilitating working groups with a clear value chain focus. And they prioritize plastics, construction, food, textiles, and e-waste to work on. I also spoke to the network of Finnish eco-industrial parks, and they represent a network of 15 eco parks across all around Finland, and they're really working at the industrial scale circular economy. Each of the eco parks that they work with have different kind of governance models. Some are public owned, some are public private, and some are purely private. And they focus on developing things to support their network, like a circular operating model, good practice guidance, and doing some advocacy work on behalf of the network. What struck with me for these guys was that despite their variation in governance models that they worked with, they could see the value of sharing amongst the network, and they were able to work flexibly enough to accommodate all of those different approaches, structures, and priorities. Next slide. I mentioned earlier, we have our own Hunter Circular Digital Hub that was relaunched in October last year. The website itself is auspiced by us, the Hunter JO, but is made for the broader ecosystem and is done so with funding from the New South Wales government. Works out to be about 1.5 FTE, but covers a really broad range of other waste-related programs and initiatives we support. The hub aims to support both formal and informal network and engagement activities by acting as a go-to place for circular economy in our region and activating the ecosystem through things like events and communications. Hearing about what other hubs are doing to support cross-sector working groups, we're now in the process of experimenting with setting up a number of these with our Coalition of the Willing. We plan to grow these out into the next layers of our ecosystem, but this really is an experiment because we don't have the resourcing available to do this. So the working groups will rely on a decentralized facilitation model. Next slide. Hubs also really need to network themselves in order to do their job effectively. And this very simplified diagram is just trying to show those connections working amongst the different levels. What's really important here is that making sure that information is effectively flowing between the hubs through things like sharing of case studies, technical solutions, cascading advice, guidelines, best practice, etc. Europe is looking at ways to develop better standards for information sharing between hubs, such as case studies, and that's being led by a group called Circular Regions. One other thing to note here in this diagram is that sort of potential relationship between a regional hub like us at Hunter Circular and eco parks or industrial scale precincts, which is a bit of a nice segue into another piece of work we have currently underway. Next slide. Not long ago, we won a regional New South Wales grant, and we have been working with GHD to delve into the business case around circular economy precincts, asking key questions like, do they stack up as a concept? Is there sufficient value potential to make them viable? What is needed in order for them to materialize? And how, if at all, do they organize? This diagram is you won't be able to read it, but it's the methodology that the project has gone through. And as you can see, it's pretty involved. But basically, we narrowed down to 4 sites that spread around the region to develop concept plans for. Quickly became clear to us that we would need more of a hub and spoke model to bring in those sites that are already contributing to industrial scale CE in our region, but that might not be suited to or willing to co-locate. Next slide. Our Futures Hub is another part of the project, which is looking at exploring the idea of whether a curative body is needed and what it would look like. It's looking at what a public-private model for a hub would look like for our region, and also what broader CE enabling functions it could or should, if any, take on. We have been strongly influenced by Europe's work in this space, but the project really seeks to sense check these concepts in a regional Australian context. We've picked up the idea of a network of precincts by looking at the Futures Hub's potential ability to perform this kind of role. So doing the bringing together of the hubs and the spokes. Stakeholder feedback so far indicates that there is actually a good appetite for some of these key functions, but we know that we need to do a lot more engagement work to really test this more broadly. Last slide. Lastly, this is one example of an early schematic of one of the precincts that's been de-identified because we're not quite at the final deliverable stage of the project, which should happen at the end of this month. But each of these 4 precincts that we selected have a different focus, which leverages what's already happening, is planned for, or there is a strong case for in that locality. We'll be ready to socialise the first phase of this work from April onwards. So if anyone is really interested in this, please do reach out. You can catch us at ce@hunterjo.com.au. And that's all from me. And back to you, Nicole.
That's awesome. I'm just sitting here thinking this is circular economy in action. It's so exciting to see your projects coming to the forefront, Eloise. Okay, we might actually just get stuck into Q&A. Now, I am seeing that there's no open questions at the moment from the group, so please pop your questions in the Q&A. I have loads myself. I'm sure that everybody's got questions to go from. But in the meantime, while people start to think about what they'd like to ask of you both, one thing that I wanted to just run through, and it kind of comes through, I suppose, in both of your presentations. Roelof, you talked a little bit, I'm just going to go back to my own notes. You talked about, you mentioned that in your table that you had of the different levels of government, you said that local government has a low influence on policy, but arguably local governments have their own policies, of which procurement is one that is commonly used. And obviously within your member councils as well, Eloise, everybody, it needs to be looking at procurement and how they can do that differently. What are some of the learnings that you both might have picked up on with regards to bringing some examples of improving procurement processes to include circular economy business models to Australia?
Yeah.
Maybe Roelof.
Yeah. That table, it was more a reflection on legislation, but certainly policy at a local level as well within the orbit. And procurement policy is one such area. Look, what I saw in Europe, there was also wanting to tackle this area. And again, if I just use Amsterdam, City Council, they've got 20 people working in the circular economy department, and that's department is within the broader ambit of sustainability. So they've got far more people working in sort of general sustainability. But importantly, they had a couple of officers there that are seconded to the procurement department to assist, because there's always additional work involved in new standards, experimentation, trials, etc. It's definitely work involved in moving in the direction of incorporating circular economy principles in what you're buying. So that was very evident, so that's the leading
commitment too, isn't it?
Very strong, yeah. But I like that because what one sees, what I've seen in local government, they tend to be quite siloed. They're very big organizations, and you've got the siloed departments. So the issue is always, how do you get cooperation? So what I liked about the model that I saw was, yes, there's one group that work together in terms of circular economy policy and what should happen, but then they second people out of that group to work in other departments.
Yeah, right. So that resourcing is really strong, really strong commitment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eloise, we've talked a little bit about resourcing as well. How do you see your role as the circular economy hub within the Hunter Joint organisation, resourcing and acting as that hub organisation, I guess, in what you described as a model that could work here?
Okay, so not specific to procurement, but more generally.
Well, yeah. I mean, looking more generally, but is there an element within your own, the way that you function as a hub? How do you do procurement, and is the circular business model approach being adopted in the way that you do procurement?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think the way that it's working for us is that for our region, in terms of the hub, where that sort of network governance piece and all of that bigger enabling piece for circular economy transition has sort of been delegated up to us on behalf of our councils. So we're working, but we came to an agreement really early. I think it was about 2018, where we said, well, they delegated to us what we'd focus on, terms of what we used to talk about, the waste hierarchy. We'll do this end of the spectrum, and you guys focus on this end of the spectrum, and that's how we'll sort of resource things more efficiently. And so I guess, yeah, through the hub and through a bunch of our grant funded programs, we have a whole circular economy program. I think we've got about 7 different projects on the go at the moment.
Wow, that's awesome.
The way we're structured is to sort of do ongoing engagement work that we do with that sort of FTE that I spoke about, which would be like running the hub itself and a couple of events a year. But then we also have that capacity to apply for grants to go and do things. So circular procurement is one of the programs that we've got through our first phase of, and we're looking for funding at the moment to do a second phase of, which I think is a really nice example, because we got through the first phase, which was developing framework and some tools for councils to use to help try and sort of embed circular practice into their decision making. But we quickly got some feedback about the difficulty and the implementation sort of aspects of this. So the second phase of the work that we'd like to do is much more focused on doing specifier engagement. So like Roelof was saying, is sort of being transplanted in specific business units or around a council, giving that sort of not only technical support, but just that sort of extra bandwidth in order to be able to rethink how you do things, or think creatively around something, research another solution, providing local databases, but also importantly, working with suppliers on the supplier side. So what we're hearing is that even the more advanced councils that they're trying to do circular procurement, are saying their suppliers, particularly their local suppliers, are just not ready to give them the information they need in order to make sound decision making. So that's kind of one example of how we're supporting it on behalf of our councils.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Eloise. And it really highlights as well that I'm guessing many of the organisations that are supplying in a place-based procurement process are many small organisations, which relates back to Roelof's research, which we'll hear more of in coming months as he finishes his PhD. I have some questions coming through. Thank you, audience. I've got a question from Sally. Thanks for joining today, Sally. A question for Eloise. It's really exciting to see what's happening in the Hunter Joint organisation. Is there also a focus on demand management, i.e. reducing the energy demands first in parallel to renewable or alternative energy sources? She also mentions green hydrogen, but perhaps the first element of that, is there a focus on demand management?
I guess I can answer this differently, and depending on what sort of area we're looking at. I think when we're talking about supporting councils, we do have a parallel program that is a net zero program that is very much focused on supporting councils to do that within their organisation and with their communities. But in terms of the precincts themselves, it is considered as part of it, I guess, but it's at this stage, we've just been at concept level, where we've been really looking at material flows, potential material flows, feedstocks, the economics, and whether or not we can sort of get as much value out of a system as possible, like where ultimately every molecule is captured. So less focus on the demand side, I suppose, at that stage, but it does it is an important focus that we need to sort of look into more as we get more mature with this thinking and this project. We've just done the very first piece of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Eloise. Another question, perhaps for both of you, if you had any conversations, from Pablo. How are LGAs in Europe evaluating suppliers based on sustainability criteria or certifications? Did either of you have any conversations around, how that is being adopted, and whether there's whether councils are actually supporting and improving those capacities to provide supply? I don't know. Did either of you have any conversations around that?
I remember the Finnish government talking about what they're doing to support that at, I guess, more of a strategic level. They have built a bunch of they have established a centre of excellence for local government or low carbon procurement. They've got all these tools, they've got a buyers group, change agents, they've developed procurement agreements, criterias, we've got expert groups, etc. And they've also got I think it's Business Finland that has got a specific fund that is trying to support suppliers on their side as well to sort of do that capacity building. So I think there's a lot of support around that councils can tap into there, that's being done at sort of a more regional and national level.
So we can get some good examples from that. Sorry, Roelof.
No, I was going to say, I don't want to add more to that. I think that reflects really that is pretty far advanced, and if one is looking for examples, Eloise has mentioned them. Good one.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. We've got a question from James. Thanks for your question, James. How much do you see the European circular economy being, it's kind of related to Sally's question in some parts, but how much do you see the European circular economy being driven by government policy compared with market-driven demand in Europe for more circular economy? So are we seeing in Europe that it's being driven by policy in comparison to market demand, or the other way around, or a mix of both, perhaps?
I might just open on this and then Eloise can
go for it.
So the Netherlands Enterprise Assessment Agency in their 23 report says that only 6% of Netherlands businesses have some sort of element of circular economy principles embedded in it. So they haven't found a very large uptake, and their economy would be a lot like ours, that the bulk of businesses are in that small and medium enterprise, and there is a relatively small number of very big. So, the uptake is quite low, and this is why they've recommended to the Dutch government, you need to look at, and coercion is quite a harsh term, but it's the best translation I can find of dwang and drang. They say coercion through policy. That's what you need if you want to achieve your objectives. But what's embedded in that statement is that, and I'll come back to my last slide about rational economic decision making. So the way I see progress in this area is that where the policy interventions need to come in, and this is always going to be market specific, whether you're talking about the market for motor vehicles or furniture or mattresses or whatever, you need to intervene in a specific market. And you need to intervene with policy in a way that it's rationally economic for people to make a decision around a product which is going to have a longer life, uses less raw materials, or any, if you will, any of the four sort of major strategies, if you go back to Nancy Bocken's work, and how she defines the four strategies. So your question, James, about what's driving what, I think at the end of the day, I just come back to my comment that the E and the C is the economy we're in. And we, consumer behavior and business behavior is absolutely driven by that. And yes, we do have niche behavior where people will actively choose something because of a philosophical position that they have, that what they're going to buy has to deliver a more circular outcome. But that at the moment in most markets, and I'm generalizing, of course, in most markets, that's still in niche phase. It hasn't entered mainstream yet. Yes, so we have Patagonia, and it's a fantastic example, but that is a niche. If you compare it to 100% of everything that's happening in sporting goods, it's a fantastic example, but it remains in niche. So
Yeah.
the real question about the uptake of circular economy is how does that become mainstream? That sort of think about it. Thanks, Nicole. Back to you.
No, thank you, Roelof. I think the rest of James's point was, how do we see Australia keeping up when we aren't seeing strong political commitment yet? I think the yet is from what we see on our side anyway, from the ACE Hub's perspective, is that some of this framework at least will be coming later this year, coming out of the Circular Economy Ministerial Advisory Group, so we can look out for that. And I think that, we being latecomers to the party has the opportunity for us to potentially leapfrog and take up some of these tried and tested methods that we've seen in Europe as we go forward with our own framework and adoption and generation of policy. So yes, so we've got some opportunities to improve there. Okay, I think we might have a couple of minutes more for maybe one other quick question. Let's see what else we've got here. There's a couple of questions for you, Roelof, which we might need to come to as a post-event response, if that's okay. So Chamari and Tiziana, thank you for your questions. I guess maybe one last point, a quick response from you, Roelof, from Wayne. He's got a question around did you find that the European circular economy was more advanced than here in Australia? And what was their approach to getting SMEs engaged from an economic viability point of view, coming back to your rational economic perspective, I guess?
Yeah, no, look, I'm pleased that question's been asked, because I want to pay credit to those circular economy officers and professionals in Australia. I must say, if I collectively put them together, and if you had to concentrate that in the city, you'd have an Amsterdam. So, if you look at what Louise is doing in terms of a joint organization, if you look at, what's happening in terms of procurement, sort of in the Victorian region, and if you look at all of that and you concentrate it, you'd say, wow, we're not lacking in terms of intellectual power, vision, entrepreneurial activity, but we're just further down the curve, and we just don't, we've developed bottom up. 2016 City of Darebin creates climate emergency. It sort of evokes thinking, in the whole nation. So we sort of built up from the bottom up, and then particularly Victoria and New South Wales really sort of get onto it, and South Australia has been pretty strong. And then after that, federal government, and it's been completely the other way around, in Europe. Yeah. So where are we at? Not short of intellectual horsepower or initiative or entrepreneurial spirit or any of that.
Yeah.
It's just how supported is it? And then I come back to my slide about, it's got to be in the strategy in the government, and there's a lot written about this, and I can certainly answer questions and direct people to read, they need to read on how do you do this. But we're talking about a fundamental change, and the change agency is the same. We just happen to be talking about circular economy. So unless you've got the good governance, it doesn't matter what you're trying to introduce in your organization or a country. You've got to come back to principles of good governance and change agency. If you try to do it without that, it becomes very problematic, and difficult.
Thank you.
I didn't answer the second part of the question, but I'll write.
No, that's okay. Time is of the essence.
Yeah,
thank you.
Study material. Thanks.
And please reach out as well, Wayne. Reach out with Roelof on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'd be happy to continue that conversation with you. And to Stephen and Ben, we'll come back to your questions with our response next week with the link as well. But thank you all for your questions, and thank you especially to our speakers today, Roelof and Eloise. Thank you for joining us, for sharing your perspectives, your experiences from the study tour. It's so very much appreciated. These things take time to prepare, so we really deeply appreciate you taking the time out to put this together for us. We have our fourth webinar in the series coming up next month on the 23rd of April. We'll be joined by Hayley Jarrick and Helen Milliser for that one, and we're looking at the industry perspectives from the reflections from our next two delegates from our study tour. We'll be sending out the link from today, as I mentioned, along with some of those follow-up responses. There will be some questions as you click off from this webinar. We'd really appreciate your responses as to help us determine where we guide our next offerings for you in terms of webinars and other actions that you'd like to see us put together. Thanks again to our fabulous ACE Hub team for putting together and organising this event. Roisin, you do an amazing job, and thanks for Sam being in the background and our comms team. And of course, thank you to everyone today that decided to spend your time with us. Keep an eye out for our next webinar series, either on the portal. You'll see our link there to join the ACE Hub portal. If you're not already joining, you need to get involved in that circular economy discussion across the country and across the world. So we're looking forward to supporting you in your joint journey towards a circular economy transition. And thank you again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again, Eloise and Roelof.
Thank you.